There you go. That's the topic, adolescent risk taking. Have you logged into the right place? That's the right date, and I'm Pete Slattery. So, hello and welcome. Let's have a look at what we're going to do. First, who am I? There's a professional and a personal. The professional is that for about 30 years I've been working with young people. Originally started not very far from here, up in St George, working with young people and their families. Pretty much all these years later, I'm doing exactly the same thing. But for about 15 years, I've been working just for youth, which is good. So I get to work with young people in all the sorts of places that you would find them in schools and youth refugees and centres and camps and everywhere. I work, I suppose, quite a lot. Somebody's making an adjustment here. I work a lot with young people who are having a hard time, but not exclusively. So I get a sense of what's going on for young people who are doing well, as well as for young people who are doing particularly hard. There's always one question that people want to ask me when it comes to this topic, because I work a lot with parents, and I imagine some of you are out there are parents. People always want to know if I've got children. And somebody asked me that a few years ago, and my usual reply was, no, I don't. And people would be thinking, he's attractive, there's still time. And people would generally tell me that's not what they're thinking at all. What happened some years ago was that I inherited a couple of young fellas. And they were, here they are, Joel and Jesse, as teenagers trying to look serious or impressive or something. And then, a few years later, we managed to produce one by the usual method. And this is a very recent photo. So in my old age, I've gone completely crazy and have created these two guys. So if you get an impression of sort of attitude from the picture, you would be pretty accurate as to what's going on. All right. Now I'm going to play you a little bit of video to introduce the topic of adolescent risk taking. So this means mucking around with this stuff. Have a look at this and see what you think. Just want to jump in. Some people go, that's totally awesome, but really don't want to do it. Other people will be just going, OMG, you know what that means. Some of the adults, some of the parents out there will be going, OMG to that. Some of the parents out there, I have no doubt, will be going, awesome, I wish I could do it. There's something really specific about that particular event that we're going to have a look at. I'll come back to that particular video a little bit later, but it's not unusual when it comes to young people. So let's have a look at what tonight's about. It's about making sense and understanding adolescent risk-taking. It's about the physiology and the psychology of that. And I'll probably say this a few times as people log on, but I'm not a neuroscientist. If you are a neuroscientist, click in some information that can add to the show, because I'm going to repeat to you some of the stuff that makes sense to me and some of the research that I've been looking at. We forget. The further we get away from our own adolescence, the stuff about adolescence, that starts to dim for us. So I'm just going to remind adults of some of that stuff. I'm also going to have a look at what's new and what's not new in terms of young people. And really, bottom line, top line, whole show, how do we keep our kids safe? Whether those kids are our own kids or our kids of the neighbourhood, our kids in our school, or who we work with because we're teachers, youth workers or therapists. Look, tonight's actually a good news night in lots of ways, really. There are tragedies, and we all encounter those when it comes to risk-taking in young people. So if you're somebody who's experienced that tragedy in some way, then my heart goes out to you. I often think of my own kids when I hear about tragedies, and I'm not sure how people always deal with that stuff because it changes your life. I've just come back from Christchurch to have a look at what's happened over there and the way that that's changed people's lives. So there are tragedies, and I acknowledge those and honour them, I suppose, in terms of the things that we remember. But there's also lots of good news and lots of optimism, and that's what tonight's about, which is also why we played you those videos at the beginning. So what do we mean by some of the words that we use? The word puberty and the word adolescence get used almost interchangeably, and they're not really the same idea. Puberty is really the beginning of the time when somebody can have children. That's what it is. Adolescence, on the other hand, is growing to adulthood from when you were a child, or possibly these days from when you were an adolescent. The other thing about risk-taking, I'm not sure that I want to define risk-taking. It's doing something that puts us at risk, in danger of harm in some ways. But here are a couple of things about risk-taking that I think are true of adolescence. Firstly, it's unavoidable in terms of how adolescents are made. It's part of how they are. It changes from place to place and person to person, but it's part of being an adolescent. It's sometimes scary for the adolescent, often very scary for those of us who are around the young person. It's often a really good thing. It's what propels us through situations and life moments that we need to get through. And it's often necessary. It's even necessary for us as a species. And one of the tricky things about this evening, and one of the things that's happening in terms of a lot of the new research, is that, well, there's a chap up in Queensland who's a neuroscientist, and I heard him say at a conference, look, we've got language and fancy shoes, but still we're basically just animals. And that's not something that a lot of us want to hear. We imagine that we've got free choice and will, and we can decide for ourselves what we want to do. But there's some kind of blend of those things. So I'm going to have a little look at that. Gender differences. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. And the research is kind of interesting and varying. But basically, a lot of the research will tell you exactly what you would expect, which is, yes, boys tend to take more risks than girls, but that tends to vary from culture to culture, and whether cultures are matrilineal or patrilineal. And also the gap is what tends to be narrowing, and that I hear a lot from workers in the field with young people. So, all right, let's have a look at some of the body stuff. First up, peak physical capability. Between about 14 or the beginning of 13, because it's coming south, getting younger and younger, the beginning of puberty and, say, mid-20s, you can do stuff you will never, ever be able to do again. Now, I, at my age, can do things that a 15-year-old can't do, simply because I'm a crafty bugger and I can actually practice things, and I've been doing some things for a long time, so I have some skills. But in terms of physical ability, between those ages, there's stuff happening that you'll never, ever, ever be able to do again. So would you, if you could right now, do this? And if you happen to be 14, by the way, if you're 14 or 15 and you want to wander away when it gets a bit adultified, that is boring, go right ahead. There's some questions that I'm going to put to you, but whoever's in the room can write those down and you can talk about them later. Jump off that little mini trampoline there on the right and do a 360 and come down on the other side. Unicycle, come down a hill. Bit of free chiropractic there. Put your shoulders into positions that are basically impossible to do, I think. Would you surf a wave? And would you surf a wave like this? Because this is a terrific, this is YouTube stuff, and I'll give you all the links to the YouTube stuff. This is supposed to be the biggest wave ever surfed. Have a look at this. Above it, and I go, put your hand up if you're a really bad swimmer. Up goes the hand. Would you go out there in the water? Yes, he would. Tells you something about young people. World's biggest wave, you just saw it. Look, there's something about young people and their physicality which is extraordinary. They can do stuff that they will never ever be able to do again. And it makes sense to not have them sitting in desks one behind the other for a long period of time in lots of ways, especially maybe boys, and you hear that stuff quite a lot. Okay, now let's have a look at the brain stuff. Now, this is going to be really general. Check it out. I've given you some of the connections. There are a couple of really notable people who are doing research in this area. If you're reading stuff about brains that's more than 10 years old, I don't mean the brain 10 years old. If you're reading literature that's more than 10 years old, go and get something new, because with the changes in fMRIs these days, functional MRIs, we can measure stuff that we couldn't even measure a few years ago. And I reckon we're going to find out stuff that in a few years' time that we don't know now. So we know that there's something about being an adolescent. Now, we know some of this stuff from the past. We're just getting evidence, but it's also slightly different from the way that we've spoken about it in the past. Adolescents are absolutely maximum thrill-seeking in a way that neither children nor adults are. So I'm going to show you Joel taking a jump here, because this is a neat little piece of video as well. Now, is this dangerous? Well, it might be for me. For him, I don't know. Have a little look. And he hasn't even taken his sunglasses off, just a little adjustments. Take it bit of excitement there. Now, you know, I went down the same hill. I didn't come down it with quite the same grace and extraordinary physical movement that he did. I got down, but I didn't hurt myself, and that was good. But it was different. Would you do this? Bungee jumping. There's a wonderful YouTube video of somebody's bungee that breaks and she lives. It's a nightmare story in lots of ways. Look at the smile on that girl's face. It's extraordinary. The fellow right at the beginning there, upside down, 360 degrees, a little dome as high as the ceiling, which is about 2.5 metres. These guys were bruised and bleeding. 3 boys from down in Wollongong. The guy who was running the show, who was a circus guy, said these guys are extraordinary. They'd never had any training. Kept on going, kept on going, kept on going. What we know, and this is called by Lawrence Steinberg, who does some amazing research from Temple University. He calls this an incentive processing system. A lot of people call it that. They talk about thrill seeking or the reward system. And what we know about the incentive processing system for adolescents is that it's actually different to the rest of us. They're actually more drawn to rewards. So if you actually get, I think coming past, the neuroscientists can tell us about this, once you get past the prefrontal cortex that a lot of us are talking about, because we know that the brain grows from the front to the back, and I'll talk about this a little bit more in a minute, but this is the bit that makes the decisions about maybe it's not such a good idea to do a flip going down that hill. That works for me, which is why I'm here talking to you. With adolescents, this bit's not working quite so well. What is working is this bit that says, this looks fantastic, give me some of that. Now, when we go, that's the striatum part of the brain. And when you actually have a look at the activation of that, when young people are actually doing stuff like this, not only thinking about it, but doing it, they're actually more drawn to the rewards, and the rewards are worth more. Now, that's a really interesting thing. So if you're doing something, if you happen to be a 15-year-old person who's listening to this and you're doing something that makes you feel fantastic, and let's assume that you're super safe doing this, do it, because at this time in your life and for the next few years, it's going to feel better than it will at other times in your life. Now, the good stuff in my life still feels pretty good, I've got to say, but it doesn't feel, if I can remember, what it was like when I was 15. Now, that attraction to rewards and the power and the immensity of the reward is something that's unique to adolescents. This is from Andrea Goldman, who is at UCLA, and it's taken straight from her TED Talk, so I'll give you the link, you can go and have a look at this yourself. Now look at that, look at the white bit. That's the brain activation of the adults. Look at the grey bit, that's kids, that's little ones. Look at the red-orange bit in the middle, that's teenagers. So the brain activation is much higher. And it also fits really closely with self-reports. And she did some research where she actually stuck people in an MRI and then fed them sugar. And they found out first if they liked sugar, and then fed them sugar, and with young people, the report of, yes, I really like that, fitted the same reading as the brain activation. So the self-reporting, the self-awareness of the reward, as well as the actual activation in the brain coincide. It's not surprising then that if an adolescent does something, even if it's risky and dangerous, that's incredibly exciting and rewarding, they may well try to do it again. 3. Now this is different to what we used to think. We used to call it dear old peer group pressure. And I've got to say, one of the things that I've worked with for years is not so much the pressure, but the response to the pressure. So when I'm working with a young person, it doesn't really matter in some ways about the pressure. It's how you respond to it that makes a huge difference. And we're finding out it's not quite as we imagine. There's a bit of that, yeah, go on, Pete, have a go. But it's more simply the presence of friends or peers that will change the behaviour. Now, let me see if I can give you some choices that I wrote down before. Now, if there's any young people in the room, it'd be interesting to know what you say in response to this. Now, just think or say it out loud if you're standing next to someone or sitting next to someone. If I gave you a choice between doing a speech at a family gathering or actually being out in the kitchen preparing the food, which would you choose? I'd be interested to know if some of the young people went speech. What if I said, let's organise a party for you and make you the centre of attention, or alternatively, we could have you organise a party for somebody else and they be the centre of attention. Now some of you are going, yes, me, of course. Others are going, no, it's the last thing I want. If I said to you, you could read poetry at your work or your school, or vacuum their house? What would you choose? Now, a lot of the young people I work with would actually rather vacuum houses than, well, it's not just poetry, it's reading poetry to a bunch of people. So that's one of the things that makes a huge difference. Choices in relation to how exposed you are. And we'll talk a little bit later about strategies for keeping young people safe, because there's a lot to be talked about there. Would you rather do this or do that? Now, this again is Lawrence Steinberg. I think there he is. Now, this is in relation to video games. So they get young people, and I've got to say, this tends to be, if you listen to Lawrence Steinberg talk, and he's got a lot to say about a lot of this stuff, these studies have been done mostly, as I understand it, with same sex. So what they do is they put a young person in the room playing video games. Now, what happens if you stick, say, me next to a young person, or somebody who's 26, which is a little bit younger than me, next to, say, a 15-year-old, the 15-year-old will be taking heaps more risks than I will when I'm actually playing this game and going, will I go over here, will I accelerate here, can I get around the corner, playing a video game. Also, will be actually taking more risks than the 26, 7, 28-year-old, many more. And the number of crashes, you can see there, are really high. So again, what you've got here is adults, and when they're alone, you're getting not hugely dissimilar. When they put somebody next to the young person, that's when it starts to change, and that's when you see the differences. And they've done it when somebody comes into the room and sits next to them. Now, you don't need to have somebody saying, go and Pete, drive fast, drive fast. It's not that. Simply having the person in the room next to a young person will change their behaviour. They've done research where actually it comes through the intercom. So if somebody says, hi Pete, I can see you, the risk-taking goes through the roof. And you can see it there on the right-hand side, the red bar shoots right up when there are friends around. And it seems to be the case that it's not just friends, but it's actually peers. So it's other young people, not only friends. More research there, I think. Now look, I couldn't find you the source for this, but it's a much repeated statistic, so I'll repeat it again without being able to give you the source. The general thinking is that when you put a young person in a car, their chances of crashing are X. When you put somebody next to them, a young person next to them, their chances double. When you put somebody in the back seat, the chances double again. Now, again, you don't need somebody saying, go fast, Pete, drop a donut here. None of that stuff. They just need to be in the car. Now, that's hugely significant for us in Australia, and hugely significant in terms of what we do with legislation around driving. So, what's going on? Now, I'll read this to you. Lawrence Steinberg says this: in the presence of peers or in situations where emotions run high, the socio-emotional network becomes sufficiently activated to diminish the regulatory effectiveness of the cognitive control network. Now, he has to talk like that because he's at a university. I think what he's trying to say is when you get excited, you can't think straight. But the complicated language is necessary when you go to university. He's got a lot to say that's incredibly useful, but it's this. And basically what they're saying is that the cognitive stuff that we spend so much time on with young people simply gets overwhelmed by the reward seeking, the impulsivity, and the presence of peers. Now here's a little graph that Lawrence Steinberg came up with. It's a kind of a hypothetical rather than an actual piece of analysis. But if you look at the top one, the blue one, one of the things that tends to show us, and this is again pretty interesting when it comes to young people, logical thinking is actually kicking in at pretty much around 15 or 16. So from about that age in life, young people actually can think. So if you're out there, you can think logically, just not when you're down in front of those waves or with somebody who you find incredibly attractive because of the red one. That line there, the dot, 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 or dot, 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 that one, that's the socio-emotional one, which is not yet mature and doesn't hit maturity, as you can see on the line there, up until about 24, 25. People are discussing the actual age of this, a little bit earlier for girls, as is often the case with a lot of things. So the cognitive stuff goes out the window, the socio-emotional stuff kicks in, and you get risk-taking behaviour. Look, this is the other thing that I've mentioned briefly already. Now, we know that the brain grows from the front to the back, develops that way. The prefrontal cortex that lots of people are talking about and now more interestingly the striatum and other regions as well. This part, and I'll say it briefly because most of you would know this is the part that develops later. This is the part that says, maybe that's not such a good idea to jump into that water, maybe I need to put, and the classic thing is you've got this hugely powerful vehicle and young people have found the accelerator and have absolutely no idea where the brake is. And that's a reasonable kind of analogy. So they're able to drive really fast, do extraordinary things, but got no idea how to stop. And that's significant. So this is the sort of executive part that says, make a decision here. It's also the part that starts to regulate emotions and make sense between the brain and the heart. Now, here's an interesting little thing, and this is not my idea. I borrowed it from whoever I got it from. Now, here's a question to you. Do you like chocolate? And if you're one of these people who's going, I absolutely adore chocolate, then I have a little activity for you. If you're somebody who goes, really, I don't like chocolate at all, then I'd like you to think of something that you really, really do like to eat. And imagine this, and it's something that I do in classrooms. Imagine this. I'm going to give you, and I don't have any and I can't pass it through the screen, I give you a chocolate now. You can eat it now or any time between now and the end of this webinar, any time you like. Or you can keep that chocolate or apple or cheese or whatever it is that you've thought of. You can keep it. And at the end of the webinar, I will double what you've got. It's a great little activity in impulsivity and in control. And I do it with young people all the time. So there you go. What would your choice be? Would you go, no, I'll have the chocolate now? Or would you wait? And if you're a young person looking at the older person and vice versa, are you the same or are you different? Reward seeking and impulsivity are actually not the same thing. They're linked, but they're not the same thing. Imagine waiting for a bus. So some young person may not want to stand in a queue and go, and there are individual differences, they're huge as well, may not just get impulsive and not wait for the bus and just, just walk or run because they can. But the jumping into waves, the one that we saw before, that's more about reward seeking. So the jumping out of the queue at the bus station, that's impulsivity. Jumping into the water, as we saw earlier, that's reward seeking. Now what might happen is that they might coincide in risk taking, amplifying each other. So what have we got? Okay, we've got the peak physical activity, we've got maximum reward seeking, we've got heightened sensibility, we've got minimum impulse control. Now what we do know is that this actually seems to hold true across cultures and geography and probably across history, with some minor changes probably for hundreds and hundreds of years, even though we couldn't measure it. And I was listening to a discussion on the radio today about Kierkegaard, the very famous Danish philosopher who was talking about the development of human beings and free will and all sorts of things. And I was thinking of this webinar tonight as I was listening to that. That's a philosophical discussion. We're now having physiological discussions and psychophysiological discussions. So it holds true across cultures and geography. And there's a fair amount of research to support that. What doesn't hold true, though, is behaviour. Now, that's really significant because it tells us that despite the fact that somebody in the middle of this country has got their brain going off with the reward seeking and the impulsivity and the low impulse control, that's happening for them, but they're not actually doing the same thing as a young person in Australia. So what's going on that's different? So let's have a look at this. Sociologically, what's changed? Question for you. Do you regard, let me separate these two here. Put your hand up if you regard yourself as an adult. Put your hand up if you regard yourself as a grown-up. Now, my guess is that some of us would be prepared to say we're adults, but not prepared to say that we're growing up. Is that something I've done over here? Oh, they've raised their hands. Oh, that's what you're doing. Okay, cool. Okay. Is that for being a grown-up or being an adult? That's kind of neat. All right, sweet. Oh, come back. Look, this is Peter Slattery speaking, and there's support from lots of people in this, but this, I suppose, what I'm giving you now is also, I guess, the benefit of my 30 years of working with young people and some personal opinions backed up by some research. Pathways to adulthood are unclear, and it's very interesting when you actually speak to young people and ask them if they regard themselves as adults or not, or how they will know, because it's unclear how to grow up, and I think it's unclear when you're grown up. And if you ask young people, and I was talking to a young girl in another part of the world who was 16 years old, who had 2 kids, and she didn't think she was grown up at all, and she certainly didn't regard herself as an adult. One of the things that I think it's Steve Biddulph who says that if we don't create rites of passage for our young people, then they'll make up their own. Now, whether you love or dislike or otherwise, Steve Biddulph, and I'm not suggesting that we all get naked and run out into the forest and beat drums necessarily, even though I am a drummer. There's some value in marking moments and passages and creating rituals for our young people. Adolescence seems to be prolonged. If you think of other parts of the world, even country Australia now, it's different. Children stopped being children at puberty and then were guided. So they started doing adult things. They just did them in less adult ways, but they were guided by adults. These days, our adolescence, I think partly because of the absence of adults, has been prolonged. And some of you are sitting at home there now with a 27-year-old sitting next to you or sitting in the other room thinking, yes, I agree. Some of you are like 35-year-olds at home. Is that person grown up or an adolescent? I'll leave that to you to decide. This is the other comment that I made. Adults, I think, have drawn back from many spheres in which they used to occupy. So if you're actually in the country, often the young person would be out next to the parent doing the same stuff, working alongside them. So there'd be a much stronger adult presence than there used to be. And I think I'm clutching now, but I think it's Bruce Perry who talks about this in terms of young children, the number of adults who used to be in the lives of young children who are now, and it's greatly diminished. There are many fewer adults in the lives of kids than there used to be. Look, when I look at Australia in particular here, I think the opportunities for harm are unique and the nature of the harm has changed, and I think we have reduced protection in all sorts of ways, and I'm going to play with that and have a look at that. Now, I've been taking ads. This was one that was down along the Cooks River. I've been taking pictures of ads for years and years, so I thought I'd actually show you some old ones, just a couple of old ones. Only a blue will do, and being a bit Freudian, I kind of thought a blue is slang, isn't it, in Australia for having a fight, and at about the same time, this one was up. The big blue, Tui's big blue. Now, punching and alcohol on the same poster, I'm not sure that that's such a fabulous idea. So things have changed. This is a picture of a young person in a state that is not uncommon these days, that we've all seen this around us, either in our own homes or close by. We also have these. Now, I love cars and I love some of these vehicles right in front of me. They're spectacular and some of them are very close to where I live, which is why I took these pictures. So what we've got in Australia is kind of a unique combination, I think, of leaving school, you get your licence and you drink legally pretty much at the same time. Now, I used to live in Denmark. I didn't know anybody with a car. No, I knew one person who was somewhat older than me who had a car. People in Denmark still get drunk, but they tend not to fall off their bicycles at 160 k's an hour. So that makes a huge difference just culturally in terms of what can actually happen. This piece of social organisation, I think, really needs a little reviewing. So what do we do? And there's lots that we can do, and this is really the good news stuff. So let me run through a couple of things that seem to be not true when it comes to adolescence, and there are things that we've thought for quite some time but we're starting to change our minds about. One is that they actually think they're invulnerable. And I know that's shorthand for saying all sorts of things. More accurately, they don't actually think they're invulnerable. They can actually just do extraordinary things. They can do amazing things that I can't do. So I don't do them. My back tells me not to. Their back tells them to. Joel jumps down that hill because his back says, go for it. You're not going to hurt yourself if you land on the sand. You can do that stuff. I've got a 3.5-year-old who flings himself around and bounces off his head. He's not going to die. Well, he's not going to die, and I've got to try and keep him as safe as possible, but he can do stuff. So shorthanded, yes, they think they're invulnerable. When you actually look at adults, the things that we think we can do and we think we're going to live forever, that's true for a lot of us as well. So they don't think they're invulnerable, but they can do amazing stuff. They don't actually think logically. Well, from that graph that we saw before, they actually do. young people from about the age of 15, 16, around there, can actually put stuff together. Now, they can't do the stuff that some of us adults can do because we've learned things and we have skills that they don't have. That's development over time. But their actual logical thinking works fine, except when they're right in that moment where they have to make that split-second decision about, kissing somebody or jumping in the water. Then it doesn't work so well. They aren't aware of the consequences of their behaviour. They actually are, for the most part. Do they care? That's something else. But if you sit down young people and ask them about smoking and drinking and driving, they know. It's in their heads, so they know. So where we can have impact, there are 4 places that I reckon we can have huge impact in terms of adolescent risk-taking. One is right here. Embrace that physiology. It's good to know about that stuff because when we do, we can actually work with it. Reward-seeking stuff. Now, I've got a couple of stories here. I think we can make all sorts, I probably should have had another asterisk, what do you call those things, inverted commas. Make all sorts of risk-taking rewarding. And here's a young fella who's doing amazing things because he can. He doesn't happen to have any legs. Doesn't seem to stop him at all. So he's doing extraordinary things. It's reward-seeking, and why the heck not? It's amazing. Now let me ask you, this is where I start to do a lot of work with kids about starting to expand their thinking and their imagination, because that stuff is hugely important too if people get stuck in hard moments in their life. The idea of hope and imagination, picturing, imagining a life that might be better than what they have already. So I'm going to ask you the same question that I ask of lots of young people. Think of your favourite band or your favourite performer. And for me, this is Fat Freddy's Drop. And some of you will be going, yeah, they're really cool. And you'll know them. They're from New Zealand, a kind of roots reggae dub band. And go onto YouTube, check it out. Now here's the question. If you could, would you go on stage, and please say yes, put your hand up. If you could go on stage and sing with your favourite performer or band, or dance, or play an instrument, would you do it? Yes. All right. And it's a great thing to ask young people because it starts them thinking about the risks that they might take. And that's a really healthy kind of risk in lots of ways. Some people are jumping on. Here's a risk that you might ask a young person. Would you be prepared to walk up to somebody who you found attractive as an adult or a young person and ask somebody out? Would you stick up for a friend? And here's a hugely important thing in terms of risk-taking. Would you stick up for a stranger? The people in your class or your school or your street, your neighbourhood, your business. Monty's public appearance. This is the boy who I was working with in a school, and this kid was like a little cherry. He makes me look like I was a rock. He's like flying around the room, And I think, okay, well, this boy wants a reward. So we were looking at risky stuff and how to stay safe. So I actually said, Monty, come out here. He ran out in front of me, and I said, okay, die, Monty. And he just dropped down. He died on the floor. And then I went, okay, to the group, what we have to do is put Monty into the recovery position. Who knows how to do that? And so people came out and did it. Now that was fantastic. We couldn't have had an actor do it better. So if he was reward seeking, he got it. And he got it in exactly the right sort of way that made him a hero in terms of keeping somebody safe. Mary's brave speech. I was up in Queensland and I had a big group from years 5 through to senior high school. And one of the things I do is this. Ask kids to make a speech. Most of us would rather rub salt into our eyes than make a speech because it's a terrifying thing, and most of us absolutely hate it. And I was having a little chat with this girl and I said, okay, chocolate involved, would you get up and make a speech for 60 seconds maximum? And so she did. Now here some kids are going, sure, I can make a speech. She wasn't one of those kids. She was a shy kid. And with the help from her teacher, which was hugely supportive, she gave us a speech for about 30 seconds. She got up and she said, well, I got up this morning. Then the teacher said, what did you do? She had breakfast. What did you eat? Cornflakes, milk or sugar, milk and sugar. Then what did you do? Went to school. It was fantastic. So she received a reward because peers are rewarding for getting up and doing something which was really very brave. Although we have to be careful. This is a great quote. A young person would rather be bad than dumb, and that's from Rick Laveau. And if you ask a school teacher about this, it makes sense. If you stand some kid up in a class and make them look silly, they'll pick up a chair and throw it at you because there's status in being tough. There's no status in standing up and being dumb. So that encouragement, that invitation to actually be reward-seeking in unusual and possibly productive ways needs to be balanced with an awareness of a young person's extreme sensitivity to the presence of other people, of their peers. And embarrassment is not what any of us like, but for kids, it's double trouble. Friends and peers have reward value. We know that, which is why I think things, and we can talk about this a little bit, but the Save a Mate type program I think has got some real value, because that's where young people will actually go. Make the less likely rewarding. Now here's a group of young people who I was working with. Now you don't start with this, but this is a moment of mindfulness. Group of young people, it was actually a young men's group, you would have seen it at the beginning before we started this webinar, we were playing one of the groups, My Life, My Journey. And on one day we actually had girls come to visit us. And each week, for 6 weeks, we'd go outside and we wouldn't do it in yoga positions or we wouldn't do it burning incense. We'd simply listen to the sounds of the city that we live in. And we'd hear the trains and the leaves and all sorts of things. Now, this is an unusual thing, especially for young men to be doing, to actually just sit quietly for a moment and to notice the sounds, the sights, and how they're feeling physically and emotionally. And we can actually take them into those spaces where they will actually do things which they wouldn't normally do, and that in itself is a reward. So we can actually make reward seeking unusual and attractive in that way. The cognitive development stuff that I've talked about before, we can actually work with that. I'm going to do a risk assessment with you here. Now remember these guys? It is the guy jumping into the water. Now what does a risk assessment do? And this is something you can do with a young person, but it needs to happen before you're in the middle of this moment where you're leaping into the water. So what would a risk assessment be of this situation? Basically a risk assessment says what could go wrong, how likely is it to go wrong, and how bad will it be if it does go wrong. So I'd like you to have a think about get crashed against the wall over here, eaten by a shark, gnawed to death by a giant turtle, I don't know. Secondly, how likely are those things to happen? How likely is any one of those things? Low or medium or high likelihood? Now some people are going to have different views about this, and young people often in their more excited moments will underestimate the risk that an adult will see. When they're actually a little bit quieter, then the cognitive stuff works. So how would you rate that? And I would say, I would probably put it as a medium. Some people would put it as a high. I'd put it as medium. Now how bad is it going to be though if something does go wrong? Low damage, medium damage, high damage, complete disaster. I think in that situation I'd probably go high. If something does go wrong, the damage is probably going to be pretty significant. There's not too many ways out once you're in the water there. Then what we do with any risk is we make sure it doesn't happen, so you don't go down to the water, or we reduce the chances of it happening. So you might go down there with 3 other people, 4 adults, and 15, and so you actually do stuff so that you are likely to avoid it. It's like the first one is I won't go down to the pub. I won't go to the park where people are drinking. I just won't go. So it's not going to happen. Or I'll go to the pub, but I won't drink because I'm underage. Or I'll go down to the park, but I'll say no. That is a much harder situation. Or the third one is that you actually soften the impact if it does happen. That's normal risk assessment stuff. And in the case of those young men, my guess is that they're pretty good swimmers. When you look at them, they're very comfortable in the water. They probably know that water. My guess is they've been there before. Somebody's videoing them. I don't think that's happening randomly. And they're wearing wetsuits. So they're protected from the cold and from some damage. So they're come prepared. So if something does happen, and if that giant turtle takes a snap at them, maybe it's less likely to get a hold because of the wetsuit. So whether we think that's sufficient or not is not the point. But they're the 3 options open. And that's a really great activity to do with any young person in relation to any risk situation. Whether it's the party, going out with this person, going to the park, but be really specific about it so you can work it out. Look, one of the things that came up with a friend the other day is what I'm calling a bliss assessment. Young people want to have a good time. So not necessarily, with that swimming one, but let's have a look at what could actually go right in any situation. You're going to go out on a Saturday night, what could go right? What could go really, really right? And then again, how do we make it happen? So it puts us on the same page as a young person as to actually wanting to make sure that they have a terrific time. And then we can go, how likely is this to happen? How likely are you to meet the person of your dreams? Well, I don't know. How good's it going to be if you do? So we can do the same thing in terms of a bliss assessment. So do both of those things, the risk assessment of any situation, and when young people are looking to do amazing things and have a great time, do the bliss assessment with them as well. Impulsivity. Now, you can devise a strategy with a young person before the impulsive moment. There's no point in waiting until the middle of the night for this to happen. Because we know young people can think. So if we actually sit there and go, what's going to be happening, do the risk assessment, what's going to be happening this weekend, tonight, when you go out with your mates tomorrow, how can we make sure that you have a really good time, which is bliss assessment, and are absolutely safe. Now you've got to, and I'll come back and I'll give you a list of things to tick, I reckon, that makes a strategy a good one. But that's where the cognitive stuff does make sense. Young people can think this stuff through before the actual impulsive moment. Bongo's classroom strategy. Young boy, again, tearing around the room. And I did the thing with the chocolate. I went, okay, here you go, Bongo. I'll give you this chocolate, and as I said to you guys before, you can eat it now, or you can wait until the end of the class and I'll double it. And I think I might have said treble it. So I did the class, and I look at the end of the class and it's gone. I think, well, he's eaten it. I went, okay, well, that's a decision. That's called a decision, you know. And he went, no, I didn't eat it. He gave it to the teacher. Now, this is fantastic, because what he's done is devise a strategy because he knows himself really well. And we're going to have a look at individual stuff in a moment. And we're getting close, we're doing well. 8:05, it's good. He knows himself really well, and what he did was devise a strategy. So even though he's an impulsive person is likely just to eat it, he had a strategy to make sure that he was able to delay his gratification by giving it to somebody else to look after him. Fantastic strategy. So we can work with the impulsivity. It's not automatically that we have to jump out of the queue. It might be, if you go to this queue, let's work out what might happen when you get there to keep you in the queue or get you doing something else that's worthwhile. Okay, societally, my partner said that's not a word, but I looked it up and it is. Now this is huge. And Lawrence Steinberg will tell you that two of the things that have made the hugest difference to young people in lots of ways to keep them safe are laws and pricing and adult presence as well. Now here's, again, a very old sign. Now I don't even follow, excuse me, I don't follow football, but that's a Malmeninga, isn't it, right in that poster? So this is near a school that I actually drove past on the way to get here. Now, here's another billboard. There's a running shoe being injected by some sort of odd syringe, and it says, nobody said you can't use performance-enhancing shoes. Now, these billboards were right next door to each other, and I think at that point it was illegal to put them next to schools. This wasn't next to the school, it was right next to the station where all the kids got off, and they had to walk past these billboards to get to school. Now, I think that's an odd piece of advertising, and call me old-fashioned and call me sensitive, but I think this stuff starts to make a difference. I think we can do stuff if we're looking at venues and venues which sell alcohol. We can look at times of opening. We can look at availability and price. And again, there's a lot of evidence around the availability. And one of the things that increases availability is exposure as well. So the more exposure we can get, the more we can actually encourage the sales to go out to corner shops and everywhere else. And that's happening in lots of different ways in our society right now. And Lawrence Steinberg will tell you, for instance, in terms of smoking, the two things that made the hugest difference were increasing the price and restricting availability. Now, there might be some discussion around that, because I think there were probably a few other things that made a difference. But those two things, which had nothing to do with adolescents controlling themselves, made a huge difference. Drinking age, there's going to be a lot of discussion around this in coming years. Some people say we should put the drinking age up. And when you think about Australia, where you drink and drive and leave school at the same time, this is the discussion that we need to have. The driving age. Maybe we should put that up as well. One of the things that I would also argue is, one of the things that seems to help, like we know that sort of defensive driving courses don't really help young people stay safe. What seems to help them is the stuff that we talked about before, not having other adolescents in the car. And this is where we need to be really careful that we don't wind up with the law of unintended consequences and kids stick all their mates in the boot and all their friends are back there. We've sort of got more danger than we actually thought that we wanted. but there might be something about the driving age that's significant. I would like to see driving classes not change the driving age, but I'd like to see driving classes in primary school. And it's what happens in the country. As soon as your feet can reach the pedal, you start to drive. So hours on the road is one of the things that increases adolescents' awareness and ability. And one of the things that's really useful is to have, even though you might be, a young person might be reward-driven and impulsive and have no cognitive control, if they have greater skill at any given moment, that may well see them through a sticky moment. Getting a license, when can you get your license? That's a debate that we still need to have as well. The circumstances in which young people find themselves make a huge difference. We know that the first 2 years after school, if you've got young people around you who are leaving school, get them doing something. Those first 2 years are really, really critical. Structured time is important, and Lawrence Steinberg's research again says we need young people to be doing stuff. Sitting around is not good for you. And this is a view of my family from some years ago, and I'm in there somewhere. An adult presence makes a huge difference. And at those moments when a young person is going through a hard time, having adults who are different from, you might be, if you're a parent or a caregiver or an auntie, uncle, and you're looking after a young person, I think it's hugely important for young people to have other adults who we trust, who they can go to. So Hugh was one of those people who my boys are going to go to, and my big boys will go to, but they know him and trust him. And I'm happy for them to go to Hugh and to Nick and to Teresa and Lee and Robbie, other people in my life. They don't need to tell me what they're talking about. I know that there are other good adults looking after my kids. And I think we need that adult presence, whether it's other adults from our family or teachers. And lots of us these days are talking about logical families, not only biological families, because we don't necessarily have mum and dad and a couple of kids. So the logical families are the people who we draw to us over a period of time, and they become our family. And our boys say that about so-and-so. Robbie's part of our family, and Nick and Trey, we say, of course, they're part of our family. Individually, and there are individual differences. Okay, you and your way of being in life. Now, I'm going to ask you, you could ask your own young person a whole bunch of questions about this. Now, if you're thinking about yourself, if you're a parent or a school teacher and you're thinking about another young person, you could do this activity for yourself, but also for another young person. Let me explain what I mean. Here's a line from 0 to 100. I'm going to ask you some questions. Are you more like this or like this? So, are you 0, speedy, or through to relaxed? So one end to the other, 0, doesn't matter which end you pick. Are you more speedy or more relaxed? And if you're thinking of a young person, you can put their name on that line. If they're not in the room, go and talk to them at some point and go, I actually put down something on this paper. Where would you think you're on the line, and where do you think I put you? So you've got what they think, what you think, and what they think of what you think. Did you get that? So you write down something and go, this is what I think for Peter, and this is what I think for my partner, Janine. And then I'll ask Janine, you write down the same. How speedy or relaxed are you, and what do you think I think about you? And here's another one. Are you organised, or are you a person who makes it up as you go? I'm fairly organised, so that I can improvise. Cautious or just jump on in? Yeah. Where are you? And you might say it depends, which is fine, gives you a conversation. Do you get easily hurt or have a tough skin? I'm hopeless. I get really easily hurt. I hope you love the seminar or I'm going to be devastated. Do you embarrass easily or who cares? Water off a duck's back. Quick to anger? Are you cool and calm? I'm quick to anger, but I'm pretty good at controlling it too. So this is where this cognitive stuff actually does apply. And I'm going to actually take you through this, and we're getting perfect time. We've done really well. Start to have a think about strategies that work. Now, look, a good strategy is one that works, and a bad one is one that doesn't. So there's that classic one of can mates look after each other? Right? I think they can in lots of ways, but they need to be able to do that. They need to be able to be the person who can step up and do something. There are 2 boys I'm thinking of who are old enough to drink, and if you gave them $30 so that they could get home in a taxi, and a lot of you can see where this is going, one of the boys would simply drink more. The other one would put it in his pocket and walk home. And neither of those strategies were particularly safe for them. So cab charge or something else. And there's this other strategy where you really have to work this one out carefully, where your young person can say to you, and you have this agreement, and it has to be absolutely guaranteed, that they can ring you at 4 o'clock in the morning and saying, I'm in deep doo-doo, will you come and get me? And you say, yes, I will, and you go and do it. But you have to absolutely make sure that that strategy is agreed by both of you. When I actually asked young people, and this is really good news, if you were at a party and a friend of yours goes unconscious, and you think maybe they've put something into their body, maybe something illegal, would you call an ambulance? All the hands go up. Most young people would absolutely call an ambulance for their friend. Good news. And we know that the ambulance people don't worry about the police, that's their business, they just look after the young person. Then when I say, what if you go over at a party? Would you want your friend to ring the ambulance? Not as many hands go up. So that's still good, but a little bit worrying because they're worried about getting into trouble. So the strategy has to be absolutely rock solid. I heard kids on the radio a while ago saying it's not the difference isn't between telling the truth or telling a lie. The difference is between telling a lie or getting into trouble. And it makes a great deal of sense. So, and kids often, they're worried about us. So, you know, this one parent I was talking to recently, and one of her rules as it works is that her daughter gets in touch, texts her and tells her where she is and that she's safe. But you actually have to build that on the relationship. Some kids will ring us and say, or they'll send us a text going, oh, hey, Mum, guess what? I just met some guys. I'm down the park drinking beer. Now, you don't want to hear that. So your daughter might go, okay, or the person, your young person might go, hey, look, sleeping over at Linda's as we agreed. We're dead tired. We're going to bed. See you in the morning. Love you. Switching my phone off. Blink. And we won't worry as much. So whatever the strategy is, it needs to be one that's going to work for the young person who we work with. And here's my list, and you'll get this. It has to seem like a good idea to the young person. It needs to fit for who they are, whether they're organised or speedy or easily hurt. It needs to be easy to remember. And it needs to be simple to do. And it needs to be cheap or free, which is why texting back and not costing money for some of the programs is a really good idea. It needs to be quick or immediate. It can't take lots of time. It also needs to leave that person's sense of themselves or the image of themselves intact or better. It also needs to leave their status or their image in a group, if they're in a group context, intact or better. And as tough as this is, I think this is true. It needs to be put into practice or have some chance of being put into practice while the person's intoxicated or excited, which usually means prep or practice. Now, you can have your own views, and you do have your own views about safe sex or not having sex or whatever, but you can't use a condom if you don't have one. Put somebody's number, your number, the ambulance, whoever it is, on speed dial. So all it requires is a simple action. It stands a much better chance of being put into action. We're getting close to an end. Look, these three things pop up a lot. If I'm going to come and pick my young person up at 4 in the morning, there's going to be a consequence. Well, it might be a consequence or it might be discipline, or I guess the word that appeals to me is restoration. We can do with our young people what we do with a 3-year-old. 3-year-old spills milk, you give them a mop and say, mop it up. And they do. And we come along and mop it up again afterwards and make it better, I know. But they're learning that when they do something, they restore it. So they're still somebody we love. We might be disappointed and hurt by what's happened, but they stay with us. And whatever we do tries to restore things as much as possible to the way they were, or make a contribution to the way things could be. Embrace the physiology. Deal with things in a social way in society. Deal with things circumstantially and deal with things individually. I think there are 4 options, and they're good options, and there's lots we can do there. Dear adult, dear young person, here's a last activity for you. Think of a time when you took some sort of a risk, it was physical or emotional or financial, and have a bit of a think. You don't have to say if you're in the room with an adult and you're a young person, or if you do this activity later, you don't actually have to say what you're thinking of. You can keep what it is to yourself, but answer these next 3 questions. How come you took the risk? And some of you straight away will say, alcohol. But it might have been because I wanted to find out, or it looked exciting. So what contributed to you taking the risk? Was it worth it? Are you the same person now? Would you do it again? Sometimes we forget, and it's worthwhile remembering. This is me, I think, at about the age 14 or 15. I found this picture recently. Yes, and it's not an upside down photo. It's in the days when the swings would go round and round and round and round. And I ask myself, would I do it now? And I'm not sure of the answer. Here's a picture I took down in Wollongong. Bouncy balls are made for bouncing. This was in a shop for kids, a big bucket full of balls, and they put this sign on it. It doesn't make any sense. Bouncy balls are made for bouncing. We want our young people to actually be who they are. We want them to bounce. That's what they're supposed to do, be who they are. We also want them to be safe. And we often need to actually take risks just to get on in life. Some young people here are looking at what they might do with their time. That's important. And if actually, and I work with a lot of young people who are having a hard time of life, we actually often need to take risks just to get out of the difficulties of life. And that might be sitting under a tree, or in the case of this young man here, he's actually taking it, he's a very physical, super athletic boxer who's having a go at Filipino dancing, taking a hell of a risk for his status and doing it well, being brave. This is good news for all of us. We know this book has been around for a long time, Doge. Plasticity of the brain goes throughout all of life from cradle to grave. And this is what's really powerful about when young people do amazing things and we can help them do those amazing things. When you think thoughts or you learn something, you actually change the number of connections between the cells in your brain. And I'm going to leave you with one last thought, which is from this fellow called Louis Cozzolino. When unexpected challenges emerge, which is why we need the risk-taking, our brains have a better chance to adapt and survive. So there's a lot of danger and there's a lot of damage, and there's also a lot of benefits to be had from taking the risks. And there are ways that we can help young people be adventurous and safe. And sometimes we just also just hold our breath and hope they're going to be all right. The brain is a social organ built through experience, and that's what Louis Cozzolino says. And one of those experiences, and this is a huge thing, and this is the thing I'd like to leave you with, that experience can be built through relationships. And he talks about this as the social synapse, what happens between people. This is Mount Taranaki in Aotearoa, New Zealand. This is the mountain. And I'm going to ask you a question. How steep is this mountain? And there's a guy in Virginia called Dennis Prophet who measures how steep people think hills are. He says, look through this hill. How steep do you think it is? And guess what his research is saying? If you're weary or carrying a heavy load, you overestimate how steep the hill is. If you're actually with a friend, you underestimate how steep the hill is. If you're with an old friend, you underestimate even more how steep that hill is. And some young person said to me recently, how many friends do you need before it becomes downhill? So I don't know the answer to that. But it's a comment about the value of going through life with somebody at your side. And we as adults can be at the sides of our young people. Relationships, yeah, that's the hugest thing I think I could say to you. Within everything that we looked at here tonight, a lot of that stuff is to do with our society and what we do there. The individual stuff, that's the way that we relate to the young people in our lives. And with that, we're going to bring this webinar to a close. We've got a few minutes over. I hope that's been all right with everybody. I will give you this, if I can. See you next time. That's me. That's my website. You're welcome to go there. I'm going to do a thank you because I've been invited along here, and it's by the Sutherland Ben, and that's what's that? Business Education Network, the Engadine District Youth Service. Done a lot of work with the Engadine mob over the years. Engadine District Youth Services Project Youth. We're all funded by DEWAS, the Youth Attainment and Transitions Program. So thank you for the invitation. Thank you to everybody out there who's been listening. I hope it's been useful for you. And please get in touch if you'd like to chat about anything or make a comment, ask a question. See ya. Thanks.